Hello there. This is John. It's a Tuesday afternoon. I hope you're doing well. I'm getting out of work and the sun is still shining, which is a good sign. I actually just changed jobs recently. I have some early calls the next morning, so my new manager let me off early. So that's something I'm thankful for. And I'm using the opportunity to try a different route home today. I was looking at different detours I could take on the bike to get to and from work. So I'm going to just scope one out and see if it seems viable. And it's also in the neighborhood of 30 degrees outside, salt all over the roads. I do think I'm going to try taking the bike in tomorrow, but I've just been a little wary to take the bike, a little unwilling to get all geared and dressed up for the cold. Just out of convenience sake, really. But I have been missing the bike. I haven't been on it in more than a week, so I'm looking forward to starting her up again tomorrow, hopefully. But where I am now is because of my lack of riding the bike. This is a little interesting. Because I want to do the vlog, I kind of don't want to get too far ahead in my Bible reading and fill up with everything that's going on in the book of Genesis when I still need to talk about the book of Job. So I've actually been slowing down how much Bible reading I've been doing because of the vlog, which probably isn't the best thing. I should probably just look back at my notes and go off of those. Regardless, though, I did want to record this despite not being on the bike. So if this is not super exciting for everybody, being in a Toyota Corolla, I apologize, but I hope this content is helpful to someone out there that's processing those last couple chapters of Job. And that's really what I wanted to talk about here. But first, let me figure out where I'm going. I think what I want to do is go straight here. So the sections of Job that I need to finish off on for part 3 was the part where Elihu comes in and speaks. I think that might be Job 28 through the end. And I might have that completely wrong, but that's the section I kind of want to touch on today. Elihu is a very interesting character. We know a couple things about him from the context. So at the end of Job, God speaks to Job and he asks Job to make a sacrifice on the behalf of his friends for their sinfulness and for their lack of wise counsel that they were able to give to Job. He counts the 3 names of the men that spoke earlier in Job, but he doesn't count Elihu in that, which is interesting because there was 4 people that spoke to Job and gave him counsel, and the first 3 God declared as sinning, but he did not say that of Elihu. So that for me vindicates Elihu, and it makes me see that what he said was good, and I actually gleaned the same thing from it as I read it through. So that's my take on it. If you have a different take on him, I'd love to hear it. And he opens up and tells us about who he is. So he says that he is young, but he's speaking because of how angry he is at the failure of his other 3 elders and the poor advice that they gave to Job. He also says that he thought it right that wisdom and age should speak and that he would just be quiet. So I think that's respectful and it's interesting, but it's interesting that what motivates him to actually finally speak is anger. And what he is really zealous and angry about is the failure of the other 3 men to speak accurately and wisely from the Word of God. So, I don't know if you see, there's some ice on the sides of the road here, so that is definitely interesting. Not that this road would in itself be dangerous, but the presence of ice is something that I can't ignore. So anyway, back to what Elihu was talking about. He starts, one way that he starts is by saying that it was the breath of God that gave me life. And if you think about it, God talks about it later, and Job sort of seems to miss it. But what Elihu is saying is that my life has a beginning, my life will have an end, and I'm being brought into God's story. It is not my place to then judge God, which is really rational, but you don't see that in Job's arguments. Job is saying that God has pierced him with arrows, and he wants an answer. He wants to know why. He needs answers from God, and he's sort of demanding them. But what Elihu says is, no, maybe you're not entitled to that. Like, God is above you. You can't give him counsel. And the last thing that he says is that God opposes those who are wise in their own eyes. I don't know, I find that really interesting. In my reflections on like depression and when you have questions in your faith and your doubts, those sorts of things, you kind of, it sneaks up on you. You don't see it that, okay, I am thinking that my view of the world is right, and when things aren't going my way, that's a problem. But really the problem might be what I'm seeing, my own sense of wisdom about myself and how the world should be. So I thought that was insightful, and I think that was a really good place to end, because then God begins to speak. What I wanted to mention is, when I read about Elihu, I compared him, or what popped into my mind was the life and ministry of Mark Driscoll, who is a name that, if you've been following kind of the events of modern Christianity in the United States over the past decade, you'll know who he is. Most U.S. churches have this problem of missing the young men and not getting young people generally into their church, but especially men. And his church was the opposite of that. He was discipling and leading men in their 20s, men in their 30s, and having a very vibrant church movement. Multiple churches were planted, and he did this kind of by bypassing, if you put this into the analogy of Job and his friends, he did that by bypassing the elders, by bypassing the more senior Christians and leaders of denominations and other Christian leaders. And he really just started a Bible study in his living room that grew into a church, and that got him a lot of fame as a church planter, as a preacher. A lot of people were listening to his sermons, including myself. And then this led to book deals. This led to some controversy. This led to a lot of people trying to take down his ministry or take over his ministry, criticize his church, which then led him to be very defensive about his church. And it all got pretty ugly. He ended up leaving his church, and I'm so glad that he, after taking some time away from the ministry, planted a new church in another growing postmodern urban area, which is in Arizona, in Phoenix. And anyway, I'm happy that he is continuing to minister, because he's an expert at teaching the Word of God, and I find him to be a good man that I can follow. A lot of the issues other people have with him, I think, are maybe more issues of tone and their view of what a minister should be. But if you look at the Bible, at the people that God chooses as leaders, they tend to be rough around the edges, countercultural, loud, angry at times. And he was known in the beginning of being the cursing pastor, and he would say some of the worst curse words in the English language as he was preaching from the pulpit. That's something that he came to change later. He would yell a lot, get very passionate, and express anger and emotion from the pulpit. And I think that's something that he has changed as well. But I think that's just from maturing and from age. And I don't say that that's a bad thing about his initial ministry. Like Elihu here in Job, I think that a lot of his anger was warranted, and it fueled a reasonable and good response. With that all being said, I have very little bad things to say about Pastor Mark Driscoll and our society, even in the Christian aspect of it, even in the Christian world. We can tend to really like to stopping at a green light here. Just take people down, and I do not support it. You can name several names. Another example is Lance Armstrong, who was a champion and an incredible bicyclist. He probably wasn't the best people person. I think he probably did some things he regrets, but I would think that what you can't take away from that man is his incredible effort and his victorious cycling. And it was interesting what they did, because basically he was in a sport where everybody was blood doping. They took away the titles of anybody because the top 40 or so people were known to be blood dopers, and he was the champion of them all. So they just totally kind of moved the goalposts and took away a lot of his accomplishments. And I just don't think that is a good thing to do. I think you should award effort where it results in being number one or accomplishing much, knowing full well that anyone who's ever won anything ever is not perfect. So I hope that comes off as relatively clear and not bigoted in any way. Lance Armstrong was a controversial figure. Even men like Coach Joe Paterno. I should do a whole separate thing on this, but if you have somebody that seems angry, seems younger than everyone else, that doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong, and it might actually mean that they're the only person in the room that's right. I look to the Bible and I see a lot of times when God vindicates one person or one voice who everyone else is throwing stones at, literally. And I see a lot of people in this world, in the social media and everything, but you also see it in the church, people that have picked up stones, and I don't want to find myself in a crowd with those people, even if it means having the stones thrown my way. Anyway, that was a lot right there. Hope not too much. If anyone has any questions or comments, maybe this would be good stuff to have a conversation about in the comment section, if you would like to. At the end of Job, then, God speaks, and he just absolutely brings it. He answers Job's prayers and his wants for God's voice, and he hears it, but I don't think it was the voice Job was expecting. I think that in Job's kind of haughtiness, he was thinking that God would explain himself in a way that would make sense to Job, and maybe apologize to Job. I don't know if that's what Job was expecting, but I think he was in a place where I don't know what kind of answer would have made Job happy. But the answer that he got, I don't think made him happy, but it was the right answer, and I think it helped Job reframe his worldview in a way that was productive and accurate. God comes and it's I don't know if anyone can read it and not see sarcasm. It leapt off the page for me. God says things like, hey, were you giving me advice when I was making the stars? Like, were you there? Did you understand how I did it? At one point, he talks about I think it's the Leviathan. Anyway, it seems like a dinosaur. He's like, oh, well, I made a dinosaur, and if you want to advise me, why don't you make your own dinosaur, and then I'll know how strong your arm is. I'll know how powerful you are, and then we can talk. So you create a dinosaur like I did. And then he says, he heaps these things on Job. And Job's response, and the whole thing I find to be very funny, actually, and I find that God has a sense of humor, that God's voice, he chose the tone that he wanted to take with Job, and he chose this tone of sarcasm. I don't know. I don't think it vindicates me necessarily in being sarcastic as a person, but I think it is God's place to put us in our place. And I think any argument that any atheist or agnostic or Christian could have that's aimed up at God, it might be appropriate for God to respond in such a way, like, who are you, oh man, to question me? the Almighty. So it's interesting to think, like, in what way do I approach God? In what way do I even ask him questions? And is it appropriate for me to be angry or upset at him, or feel that what he has done is unjust? I guess in I think I get a little bit of room here. In theory, this stuff is easy to say, but I know when you've been hurt and when you go through something in life, it's not as easy to just lean on the book and what you know to be true. But I can see, and you know, it's not like what Job went through was small; it was huge. But I'm just thankful for this story that shows me this process of a man being suicidal and deeply depressed, questioning everything he believes about this world and about God. And then he gets a response from God that ultimately kind of brings him back to a view of God and a faith that allows him to live out the rest of his life with life making sense. That was a long statement, but I hope that made sense to you. It's just a good story. It was good to reflect on and read. Job God, like, basically says, now you respond, you answer me. And Job says, you know, I see that what you said was right. I had questioned you, and I was wrong to do that. And now I regret everything that I've said, and I have nothing else to say. And my lips are now sealed. And it's like, he's at this place where he can just be still and know that God is who he is. And it's a blessed and a good thing. Let's stop off here and get my hair did. That's how some people refer to getting a haircut. But that was about the end of the book of Job anyway. Like I said, I was thankful for it. Helped me process some things. A lot of us would have questions for God and say, like, you know, why don't you talk to me? Why don't you show miracles anymore? God has made it all available to us. Like this book of Job, it goes through so much, and what Job experienced and the thoughts that he had, the questions he had, and what God's answer is to it. I think it parallels so much of the human experience that we could have, so that it wouldn't be that God would need to speak to you specifically, because he's revealed so much of it in his word, if we would just read it, if we would study it and ask God the questions we have for him, but then to seek out those answers in the Bible, because I really think they're there. So I think that's all I'm going to say about the book of Job. I think this was across two motovlogs and this one. I wasn't happy reading this book. I wasn't joyful, but I have the sense that it's good, and now that I'm done with it, I'm glad that I read it, and I'm glad that I picked up what I did from it. I don't think I summarized everything I said across this maybe 30 or 40 minutes that I've talked about it, but it was good stuff, and I would like to know what you thought about the book of Job. If you have any thoughts on it, maybe you can help enrich my understanding by sharing those with me. So that's all I got. Thanks for riding with me, guys. This route I took ended up being a pretty good one, and I think it would work well on a bike. Nothing too crazy, but it does keep me off the highway if I want to be off the highway, and relatively straight and safe roads. So it wouldn't be an exciting commute. I don't think there's a way for me to get an exciting, windy commute to work unless I take a huge detour, which I might actually do when the weather's nice, but they would just give me another route to go to change things up. If I have a little bit of a longer motovlog, it takes a little bit more time than the other ones. Anyway, that's all. So thanks for riding with me. I will catch you on the next one.